What's up, guys? Ben here, bringing you the next installment in our preview series for the CDL season / Major 1. In this video, we're going to cover two of the teams I think that are going to comprise the top three probably for the majority of the season, and the two teams that did make it to the grand finals of champs last year and kind of went in sort of different directions in the off season. So we're obviously talking about Atlanta FaZe and LA Thieves. Let's dive in, see what the teams did over the last couple of months, where they stand, where they're good at, what they struggle, and then our final predictions on how they will do. We're going to start with Atlanta FaZe and let's dive in. All right, so it was a weird season for FaZe, obviously coming off of Cold War, where they basically were winning everything outside of that one event where Ben Bans had an amazing series in the grand finals against them online, and that other event where Nick Classic and the Seattle Boys went huge and knocked them out in losers bracket. Outside of that, they were pretty final in Cold War, and so going into Vanguard, a lot of people had them as potentially the first team to ever go back-to-back as COD champions. And while they were pretty good all season, making a lot of grand finals, they never actually finally won one. I mean, they lost in so many heartbreakers or just one-sided series at live events last season, culminating in a champs grand finals where they just did not show up in the beginning, made it a little bit closer towards the end, but the deficit was too large. And it's kind of crazy that this team, didn't really grab one. You look at their stats, and I mean, they were an elite team last season, winning pretty much at the 60% clip, which is what you want to see at this level. Look, they did have some tough maps last year. They couldn't figure out Berlin Hardpoint to save their lives. And I think the biggest thing for me, if you look at their team last season, is they were actually like pretty solid and kind of got better at S&D sort of at the end of the year. But I thought what was really interesting is they almost got away from, or were struggling with, sort of the being the best team at First Blood, which they were really good at in Cold War. And I think it really limited their ceiling when they played S&D against more elite teams, like LA Thieves, who really rounded into form on that at the end of the season. We'll take a look at their stats. So for FaZe, I think, the numbers, if you look at the sheet here, and again, shout out to my boy, as always, I owe you Turtle for this, don't necessarily tell the story of a team that didn't win an event last season. Like, by the way, it's even more hilarious if you look at like their win percentage by game, or they went 12-4 in game 5 and didn't win an event. It's kind of wild. I think to kind of segue into sort of the thinking, I think eventually, of the roster change, if you take a look at their numbers by stage last season, the team was pretty good at Hardpoint pretty much the entire year, but you can see that their S&D kind of got worse throughout the year. They had a tough one in stage 2, just overall in S&D, pretty good stage 3, stage 4, 500, champs 500. So like not really what you would expect from this team that's really been a top 2 S&D team year to year to year. And so in the offseason, FaZe decide to move on from Arcides, and he swaps position with Slasher, who's coming over from LA Gorillas. And that is the main roster change that FaZe made this season. So let's talk a little bit about it. I think on the FaZe side, I think Austin kind of gives them sort of a different version of the in-game leader they were looking for from Alec. Talking to people around the league, and I discussed this sort of in previous videos I had done in the off season, that a lot of people sort of had remarked that Slasher's worked on a lot of his issues that he's had on some past teams. If you're newer to the scene, Austin's been a long-time pro. He's won COD champs, but the last couple of teams he had been on sort of prior to the Vanguard here had kind of gone the same, and I think some of that was a little bit on him. He was just a little bit too toxic in team situations. The way that he applied feedback, not necessarily that he was applying feedback, but the tone, the way he approached those conversations were really harsh, sometimes really just sort of getting in people's faces and kind of making a scene. And so it always kind of disrupted the team chemistry. And I think somewhere between him getting dropped from sort of the LA Thieves OGLA team and landing on LA Gorillas, I think he kind of changed a lot as a person. And I talked to his ex-teammates last season, and they really kind of attested to that. And I know the LA Gorillas team didn't always have the best of results last season, but his teammates pretty much said that this guy has really become a different person. Yes, he's going to be critical after maps and really help guide that conversation. He's going to make sure that everybody's watching VOD and they really take the right lessons after each map. But he's not really going to take sort of the same aggressive, egotistical tone that he has in the past. He's a little more cognizant of sort of the team dynamics and trying to be the best person he is. And, on top of that, he also had a fantastic season last year. And I actually think low-key people may not realize, like, S&D was probably his best game mode last season. We talk a lot about FaZe and they're kind of where they maybe came up short last season. I think them looking for an upgrade on the AR position for someone who's maybe a little bit more suited towards that game mode. And Austin's been a pretty good search player for a minute. Austin had a great season in general last season, but for an LAG team that was meh at best. I think Austin was a big reason why they went on that massive S&D win streak in the event that they won Major 2. And he kind of ran it out in a really quality season. So where is this team good? I mean, they are good at every position. I think the player who probably had the best season last year was Selim. MC ended up being the MVP of the league. And I think and I should be, transparent, MC is my son. I say that jokingly, but, I was on FaZe, we did pick him up. And I've kind of seen this kid grow from someone who was very shy, hadn't never gotten on a flight before, stayed in a hotel, to being someone that's very vocal, really tries to help get the team kind of progressing and moving, really worked on his communication in recent years, being a little bit more decisive in his comms, but his playmaking ability on the map, and I think his ability to stay alive as an AR and really kind of hold for his team is key. I think a lot of people complained last year at times. They felt like, MC was playing too slow. And I think that, some of that, I kind of see where people are coming from. Some of that I think is a little bit misguided because I think FaZe's system a lot of times is, especially if the subs are not really having an impact, if Simp and Abizi are having slow maps, you do need your ARs last year, which were Selim and RCs, to try and play a little bit slower and stay alive. And look, to be honest, Abizi and Simp were pretty good, but last year I think at times had some bad maps, especially in finals. So I think the strength of this team really is that AR duo. I really like Selim and Slasher. AR duo, again, really good at staying alive. They're going to get kills. They're going to really hold their own against the elite AR duos, and they're definitely like top 3 in that aspect. And the other strength too for them, by the way, is probably their sub duo. I mean, this sub duo of Simp and Abizi, and I think this stat is wild if you think about it. We've had 3 Call of Duty champs, and then a 4th obviously was the last year in Black Ops 4. Simp and Abizi have made all 4 of those. They've won 2 of them, so they're 2-2 in the last 4, and obviously the 2 losses, one in the Modern Warfare Online season due to COVID against Dallas Empire, and last season against LA Thieves. They've been pretty much that elite top of the food chain SMD duo for almost half a decade now. I really don't see that changing. This duo, when they are going, are definitely hard to beat. And I know right now in this game, it's a little bit of 3 or 4 AR meta. You're going to see Simp run the AR more than you will see Abizi. And look, I know Tyler Abizi didn't have the best of seasons last year. I think he readily admits that. I think that's something that he probably is going to improve this season. I think if this team wants to win events, he's going to have to do that. But when this duo is on and they're unbelievable, and it speaks volumes of last season. I don't think either of them played at like an MVP level, and their team still was like the 2nd best team last year. I think where this team struggles at times, and where the Austin move I think really helps, is I think because of the way that Simp and Abizi and Selim play at times, I think they really need someone like Austin to really make sure that they're doing their little things in communication. That has plagued this team at times, and when we look at why they've struggled at kickoff classics over the years, and we'll get to Major 1 previews later in the week, but they have a really tough schedule and they may get off to a little bit of a slow start. It takes this team some time to really get up to where they need to from a communication standpoint in map in order to be talking enough to really do the little things in directing traffic. I think that's maybe the one weakness for them. They're not like really, really elite communicators on the map like some other teams. I think if we talk about another weakness for this team, and kind of the last one I'll cover, I think is First Bloods and S&D. So in the Cold War year, and again, I'm taking a look at a stat sheet here from a Cold War, again from Turtle. If you look at their numbers in that year, their first blood percentage was 52%. And when they would win those rounds, they won them 78% of the time when they got first blood. So they were winning a lot of their 4v3s. And if you convert that to the 54% win percentage, their rounds where they were winning 3v4s is also very good. But I think they regressed a little bit last year. If you take a look at their first blood percentage, they were actually not getting first blood in a majority of rounds. And they were still pretty disciplined in winning a good percentage of them, but not in that sort of high 70s, almost 80% they were a clip before. But interestingly enough, their round win percentage was actually about the same. So I think for me with this team, I think something I'm going to be looking to see is, would they get back to that form for Abizi where he's just sort of the first blood demon? They really excelled at that in Cold War. They really excelled at that in Modern Warfare. And then last season, I think with Tyler's sometimes struggles in that game mode, they got away from that, especially against better teams that were really disciplined. I think if this team wants to get deep this season, they're going to need to be back to that elite S&D form. As always, when we look at matchups against the top teams in the league, FaZe versus Optic, FaZe versus Thieves, it always comes down to these searches, especially in matches that are going to go before best of 9s. We're talking about like non-grand final matches. Doing a good job in S&Ds on maps 2 and 5 are really key, because respawns are going to come down to map situational picks. These teams are going to have strengths and weaknesses, and the vetoes are going to kind of even things out. So this team needs to be better, I think, at S&D this year and get back to their dominant form. So let's talk about where I think this team will place. The coaches have this team in second overall. And there's a decent gap between them and third right now. Obviously, Thieves are in first, and we'll get to them in a second. I think this assessment is pretty fair. I don't really think you can put Thieves not in first, considering they are the defending champions. I expect FaZe to be, once again, a pick, probably a favorite pick or around a favorite pick for most of the events this season. I think I see some people on Reddit thinking that Slasher is going to struggle with this team. I don't think so. I think this is a really good team fit for Austin. It's probably the best team that he's been on in a very long time, and you can maybe argue that it might be the best team he's ever been on. And I think that they will grab an event this season, although at the moment, I like them to be in that grand finals at champs, considering, again, the history I mentioned before. They've been to the last four, if you look at Simp and Abizi. I don't know, though, if it's as clear-cut of a favorite as I would have said going to the Vanguard year, Cold War year. I think there's a lot more competition now, but if you're going to pick a team from the group of 12 that's going to be thereabouts at every event this season, this is probably the one to pick. So that's FaZe. Let's talk about LA Thieves. So Cold War year, pretty mixed. They tried like 99 different lineups. It didn't really work out. They ended up making a decent amount of changes going into the Vanguard season. So they sent Slasher off to LAG. They dropped John, and they ended up picking up Envoy from that Chicago Huntsman team after they broke up, which I think in retrospect was probably an interesting decision at the time from sort of that camp, and we'll talk about that in the video coming out tomorrow. They ended up rolling with this lineup of Kenny, Draza, Octane, and Envoy, and at times in the beginning of the Vanguard season, they were okay, and I think at some point near the middle of the season, they really started to click, and especially in specific game modes, and we'll get to that, and they ended up being this team that going into the last event of the season won back-to-back, Major 4, and then Champs, and they looked like really sort of the best team in terms of teamwork going into Champs, and then the offseason, obviously, because they won that event in pretty convincing fashion versus Atlanta FaZe. So no real changes on the player side for LA Thieves this season. We don't know who their substitute yet is, though. It was Pentagram last season, but he obviously didn't play. The only change they've really done to their organization is Mud Dog moved into more of a content role within the organization. They brought Novus Vita back. He was an analyst for them for a while, and then he went to Seattle, and now he's here as a GM at LA Thieves. And I think it rounds out a very quality coaching staff with Shane and with JCap. Although I didn't remark on the Shane thing earlier, I think Shane definitely really helped bring the coaching staff another dimension last season. Shane's a really good vibes guy, really smart, and I think like really kind of got them paired with Cap. I think it really kind of brings two different approaches to coaching, and I think it makes a really good message for the players. But anyway, Novus Vita comes over. He's very data focused. And I think they have one of the better front offices now. So they're well prepared, I think, for some of the interesting challenges for it this season. These are their stats, by the way, from last year. You see the hardpoint numbers, great. The rest of the numbers, good. You see the S&D number, you're like, well, 29 and 27, what's the deal there? Well, they were pretty mediocre in S&D the first couple of stages. 4 and 8, 5 and 7 in stage 2. And really somewhere around Pro-Am, they started to grind it, sort of get back in form. 5 and 5 is stage 3. You see the last two events of the season. They were 6 and 1 at Champs and 9 and 6 in stage 4. So going into the last two events of the season, they were probably the best search team. And people really just couldn't touch them on maps like Tuscan and Berlin. They actually did not lose a Tuscan for 2 stages. After, I think, really being kind of a meme team on Tuscan. I think we were really hard on them on the flank at times in the beginning of the year on that map because they would just blow man situations like really badly on the map, but they really worked on their situational play last year and improved throughout the season, and they've rounded into form, probably being like the hottest S&D team at the final 2 events. So this is their team that they are rolling with to start the season. Again, the team that won Champs last year. Let's talk about where they are good, where they may struggle. I think the strengths of this team, they're really, I think, comes down to some of the playmakers on this team. I really like players like Draza and Envoy and Kenny and their ability to be players that are not like one-dimensional. And you may say to me, oh, but Ben, isn't Envoy just known for flanking? Well, to be fair to Envoy, when he was on Chicago Huntsman, no one on his team wanted to take long routes. So I think he ended up having to kind of be that guy. But on a team like this, where they can play a little bit more of a situational game, where they can at times kind of feel out and kind of play towards rules and make sure that everybody's sort of, when you're a certain person off a spawn, you take the long route. If not, you're going to hit old or hit new. I think they're able to play kind of more of a system COD. And when I talked to coaches last season sort of about this team, they always said that this team was very disciplined in respawn. And I think that comes off the strength of those 3 guys. And it sets up Sam to really kind of hold his power positions, play sort of a classic AR role. And he had an amazing season last year. I've been very critical of Sam, especially during his Seattle tenure, the first 2 years of CDL, but he really stepped it up last season. Has put himself back in that elite AR convo. I think if there is maybe one weakness with this team, when they were really struggling in S&D last season, It was at times Kenny and Octane. Now at the end of the season, again, they were very good in this game mode, but I'll be on the lookout to see, as things start, do they continue that form? And if you're going to see struggles, because I think Draws and Envoy are really like elite tier S&D players. Sam's always been up and down in this game mode in his career as more of an island player in Search. I think teams always try to find ways to exploit that. And so he struggled at times. For example, he had a famous series earlier last year where he did not get a single kill across 2 rounds. 2 games of S&D in maps 2 and 5. And surprisingly, Kenny's numbers are not amazing in S&D last year. I don't know how much of that is the struggles in the beginning of the season, but you would normally expect better from Ken on that game mode. He's usually pretty solid in Search. So curious to see if that trend continues. But again, this team was successful last year off the back of the S&D, but if they sort of regress a little bit on that form, I think it'll be interesting to see where they fall. Just going back a sec, by the way, I want to kind of also cover something with this team. It's not really a strength or weakness, but more of a remark on the current meta right now. I think, again, a lot of people, when they look at teams like Thieves, they ask, well, is this a team that's going to repeat? Is this a team that may, over the course of the season, maybe regress a little? I think right now with the way the meta is set up, it actually kind of favors them because it's not a 2 SMG, 2 AR meta. It's a 3 AR meta. And I think that really suits their team more, with Envoy being more kind of the full-time sub player. And you got Ken and Draws can really kind of use the M4 and play their sort of variety play styles. But I still think personally that I'm a little more glass half full with this in this team, because there are some haters out there that say, well, maybe this team's going to regress to sub meta. They might kind of see more of the LA Thieves we saw in the beginning of last season. I think they've kind of learned their lessons from last year. I think when these players have talked a lot in interviews recently, and up into and including sort of the off season, they've talked about, they think a lot of their problems from the beginning of last year really came down to more their team chemistry and overall approach to the game. And again, we go back to the Shane thing. I think at some point after Major 2, after their struggle at Minnesota, like they reflected on things they had to do as a unit, either succeed or fail. And I think they've made those changes, and they understand kind of the level of practice, the level of preparation, and the level of sort of individual approach they need to do to sort of be winners. So I'm not super concerned with this team on that front. And I think the coaches kind of agree. They have this team placed first. And again, that's no surprise because talking to coaches, they've looked really good in practice. And I mean, I don't think anyone's going to have the balls, and they would be crazy to put this team outside of first, considering they are the defending champions and we played 0 matches so far in the CDL this season. Here's my assessment on LA Thieves this season. I think, like FaZe, I think they're going to be thereabouts for most of the year. I do think, though, this league is competitive. We are talking about the first event of the year, so things can get a little bit wild. I look at teams like Toronto, Minnesota, and Optic Texas to potentially kind of mix up and make it not really sort of a clear-cut top 3, at least when we're having the conversation about who's going to do good at Major 1 and Major 2. But I don't see this Thieves team regressing. Do I think that right now I'm going to give them sort of my bet to go back-to-back? I mean, historically, that's never really happened in Call of Duty. So the hasty would tell you probably not likely. But I think this Thieves team coming in should be pretty good to start the year. But I will be curious if they struggle early or they have some bumps, how they deal with that. Because it's been pretty smooth sailing, I think, for most of the spring into summer for them. And they haven't really had sort of, or been sort of a bottom half team since sort of the middle of last season. I like where Thieves is standing right now. I expect them to have a pretty good start to the season. Will they win the first event? I think we'll see. And yeah, that's kind of it for this video. I think those are, to me, if I were going to pick 2 teams, I think that are sort of my front running kind of contenders right now with 0 matches played in Major 1. I think those are what I'm going to go with. I will preface and say this, and we'll talk about this more in the video that I'm going to do kind of at the end of this week. These next 2 weeks of matches are going to be really funky, and I would expect a number of upsets. I think teams understand that these matches are more so about practice. And for teams like Thieves and FaZe who are confident they're going to have enough points to make it 2 champs, I think if they kind of work on things and they go 2-2 over these next 2 weeks, I don't think they're going to feel too terrible, because dropping 20 CDL points for them, I don't think is a big deal, as opposed to, I think, teams that are more in the bubble where it's going to come down to 10 or 20 CDL points. So we might see some bumpy results from these teams, but I think we'll kind of evaluate where we're at the end of these 2 weeks and, kind of see where those struggles were, if they have them, because I think they both have tricky kind of schedules if we look at those matches. So more to come there. Let me know in the comments what you guys think about Thieves and FaZe. Do you think you agree with me with that they're probably the contenders for this season? We still have a few teams to talk about in our next video. That's going to be our last one in this series. So I'm excited for that, and then we'll get ready for more Major 1 preview stuff. So make sure if you like this video, smash that like button, subscribe for more content, and guys, we'll see you on the next video. Thank you all so much.